Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the Board of Selectmen's forum on the ballot questions. If you could all please take your seats, we'll get underway. Just a few ground rules. We have 3 questions we're going to go over tonight. We have roughly from 7 to 9. We may go a little later if it's necessary, but looking at the number of people here, hopefully we'll be out of here. To my right is the Ashland Board of Selectmen. We're here because, my name is Robert Scheer. I'm the current chair of the Board of Selectmen. We're here because the board has voted to put these items on the ballot because we think they're important, and just want to introduce them this is Steve Mitchell, Yolanda Greaves, Joe Magnani, Carl Hackinson, and our town manager, Michael Herbert, is there. So again, welcome. There's 3 items we'll go over tonight. We'll do we'll have a presenter for each one. We'll do a factual presentation on the ballot question, make sure everyone understands what they mean and what your vote means. I will then open it up for statements from board members, should they care to make one, and then to the members, the residents in the audience, to ask questions or make short statements if they wish to. I just ask you keep in mind that we have a limited amount of time, and I will hold you to a time limit if that's necessary, okay? So thank you. So we're going to get started. The order of presentation, we're going to do the Mendez feasibility study first, followed by the Valentine Estate debt exclusion question, and then the recreational marijuana opt-out or ban question, okay? So without further ado, I'm going to invite our superintendent of schools, Jim Adams, to come up here and make a presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Good evening, everyone. So what I would like to do is spend a few minutes giving some factual information with regard to the Mendez feasibility study, what a feasibility study is, and the reason why we're asking for $1 million debt exclusion at this time to perform the feasibility study. And going back to last year in the January timeframe, the Board of Selectmen and the school committee unanimously supported myself putting forward what we call a statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. From here on out, I'll call it the MSBA. It's just a little bit easier. So the MSBA is a state-run program that provides grants to communities to help offset the costs of school facilities and school buildings, whether they're renovation projects, building new buildings, repairs, additions. So they provide communities with an opportunity to be in the grant program. Not every community gets in. So when I put forth the statement of interest, we were notified in the fall that there were 80+ communities that put forth an opportunity with the MSBA to be invited into the grant program. There were 15 communities chosen, so 15 out of 80. So what that means is starting May 1st, we have 270 days as a community to make some commitments to move forward within the MSBA grant program. We are not committing, I want to be really clear, we're not committing to building a new project, a new building anywhere. So I've heard, citizens say, hey, Jim, we're going to commit $40 million for a new building, and that's not the case. We're in phase 1 here, and phase 1 is the feasibility study. For those not familiar with the Mendez School, it was built in 1954 as an elementary school initially. Then in 1956, it had a tremendous renovation to it. So if you're looking at the Mendez School, where the auditorium is and the cafeteria is, that's what I call the new section. That's 1956. The rest of it is 1954. So it was converted to a high school. So for 10 years, it was functioning as the high school for Ashland. Then in 1966, it got converted back to an elementary school. So you can imagine, just even in that short time period, what facilities looked like for high school kids from ages 15 to 19 to currently we have grades 3 through 5 at the Mendez School. So you're dealing with kids from 10 to 7, just even the facilities, the bathroom facilities, the lockers, all of those things are, again, designed in Mendez for high school students. And Carl, you'll probably be able to fill in some of the gaps of the historical knowledge here. I'm sure, what was it when you went there? Or Joe?
Well, I went there first grade and
Yeah.
eighth grade.
Yeah, so first and eighth grade. So, Joe?
And it actually turned into 4 through 8.
Right.
when we were there.
So it's had many purposes, right? And the one thing I've really noticed about Ashland, this is my 9th year here, is that we've really done and we do a really good job of multi-purposing our facilities, our classrooms, and making sure that whenever we ask for funding for facilities projects, that there's a real need for it. Most of you understand that Ashland is growing and still growing as a community. The Mendez School is designed for about 590 students. Currently, we have 647 at the Mendez School. And we're anticipating closer to 670, 690 over the next 3 to 5 years. So that being said, we're out of space. 2, the facilities are inadequate. They're not ADA compliant throughout the building. And should we have to put any money into that building, 10% of the value of the building, we're going to have to convert everything in that building to be ADA compliant. So there could be a tremendous cost factor there. The MSBA program, the way it's designed, again, is to provide an opportunity for a community to get reimbursement, if you will, for a building project. So the feasibility study looks at not only the shape of the building, the need for, they look at our enrollment, they look at the types of programs you have within a facility. So real quickly, Mendez, we have two separate programs at the Mendez School. We have what we call our neighborhood program, which is a multi-age 3, 4, and 5 are together for a 3-year period. And then we have what we call our traditional or single grade programs. And so space needs are very different for both in terms of how we conduct business in terms of the teaching and learning. That being said, teaching and learning is very different today than it was in 1956 or 1954 when it was designed as a school building for elementary kids. It's not, most teaching today is no longer, standing in front of a classroom and providing instruction. There's a lot of group work. As you know, we have lots of students with special needs where we do separate pull-out sections and areas where they can get specialized instruction. So the project is moving forward in the sense that we have the ballot question where at town meeting, 2/3 of the people at town meeting need to vote in favor to move forward with the ballot question on the 15th of May. What we're asking for is that $1 million will cover, it's up to $1 million, will cover the cost of the feasibility study. So it's the analysis, and that's about an 18 to 24 month process. So it's looking at the building itself, potential space for a new building, should that be one of the options that ends up being chosen. It looks at the facilities currently, what needs to be done if we're just to repair the building or to renovate the building. What I will say is it's really clear that no matter what happens, we need more space at Mendez. That's just the reality of it. At the Warren School, we've added 4 modular classrooms already. We've leased them, and that lease is up next year. And we're going to have to consider purchasing those classrooms because Warren is out of space. The only way to make it work is to keep those classrooms there. We did look initially at adding modular classrooms to the Mendez School years back. Major issue with electrical. The entire electrical upgrade would have to occur, which is millions of dollars. So what we're looking at for the community to do is support the feasibility study. Then it's a simple majority at the ballot that come January, we take that information and we send it to the MSBA, and they still determine whether or not we're part of the grant program. We're not guaranteed, even if we pass the $1 million, they have to approve us getting into the next phase of the program. So there's about 8 phases that we go through. In 18 to 24 months, after a school building committee has gone through this extensive process of looking at our facilities, we will then come back to the community. So we're talking January 2019, we begin the process, and 18 to 24 months later is when we would be coming back potentially to ask the community to fund or support one of 4 options. And I list the 4 options here according to the MSBA. We can repair the building, we can renovate the building, there can be an addition renovation, or we can build a new building. Those are the 4 options. It's a collaborative effort, I want to be clear, with the MSBA. They look at it from a fiscal standpoint as well. They don't want you building these elaborate facilities that are going to cost taxpayers extraordinary funds because they're typically reimbursing part of it, right? The example I can give you is the high school, what some people still call the new high school, but the new high school is now 12 years old. And so while it's not new, I think when we look back at the years leading up to the building of 65 East Union, we'll know that history will tell us we made some poor choices as a community with regard to taking advantage of the MSBA reimbursement process. So we had close to a 70% reimbursement rate. Was that right, Yolanda? You were part of that. Originally, it was about...
Not quite that high, but it was...
It was pretty close because it ended up being 62
Yeah.
later. But the facility, the way it was designed, another $1.5 million that was voted down, would have built the athletic complex, the fields, as well as building a preschool onto the high school, which then you could use the teachers of the high school. We could create some programming there. So as you know, now we have 5 school buildings in the community. The Pitaway School downtown is just used for preschool. That could have been part of the high school. 4 years later, 2010-11, the community decided, you know what, we need the athletic fields now. I think that was a $3.5 million, and that came out of CPA funds. There was 0 reimbursement from the MSBA. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we want to be, we have to have some long-range vision here as to what is going to occur with an opportunity for reimbursement. Should we not pass and get into the feasibility phase, then eventually we're going to have to do something. The MSBA said if you do not continue along with us, then you're out of the grant program. So, because again, there were 80 plus districts that needed support, 15 were chosen. And each year, districts are applying for it. We will then be asked not to participate. And that's okay, if that's what the town decides. But what I think people have to understand is, now it's 100% cost of the taxpayers in order to repair, renovate, add on, or rebuild, or build a new school. So the feasibility study, first phase, not asking to build a building at this point. So I want to be clear. It's really about doing an extensive study and designing, getting a schematic design of a facility and or repairs, and then coming back to the community in about 2 years to ask for the next piece of support. I think that's about as much as I can cram in 8-10 minutes.
Questions? Any questions for Jim on this question? On this ballot question?
Oh, yeah. So on the sheet, you'll notice that at the bottom, the $1 million, should it pass, and that's what the school building committee, which is made up of citizens in town, Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, School Committee, they're the ones who will be in charge of hiring designers as well as project managers. And so projected, I think it was for a $450,000 assessed home in Ashland, it's $14 a year at this, for 20 years at the current rate. That's without reimbursement. So,
How do you come up with $1 million?
so the good question.
Excuse me, just a reminder that
yeah.
people cannot hear you if you don't speak into the mic. So if people want to line up. So,
I'll repeat it.
Yeah.
Sure. So the question was, how did we come up with the $1 million for the feasibility study? So if you go, first I'll direct you to a couple of places. If you go online, the Ashland Public Schools webpage, there's also a link to the Mendez School Building Project. And I've been doing presentations around the town and offering opportunities for people to see the building and do tours of the building, why it's critically important. But you'll see a slide in there that shows from the MSBA all of a number of elementary school projects throughout the state where their feasibility, so we take the average of their feasibility studies. But I always want to caution is the Mendez building is about 96,000 square feet. And many of the projects that are listed have less kids and less square footage. So the most recent project, and communities are different. Newton just had a $1.4 million feasibility study for a renovation project. Again, we're not Newton, we're Ashland. We have to figure out what's best for Ashland. But that's where it comes from. It comes from having historical data from the MSBA. Yeah, good question.
Thanks. Jim, one thing, I'm just going to, for the benefit of folks who are watching, we all have a sample ballot. I'm just going to read the ballot just so the question. So this is actually what folks would be asked to vote on. The Mendez ballot question: shall the town of Ashland be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2.5, so-called the amounts required to pay for all bonds issued in order to pay the costs of the David Mendez Elementary School feasibility/schematic design for David Mendez Elementary located at 90 Concord Street, Ashland, Mass. And it's a yes or no. So, and that would be a simple majority vote, right? So. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. Mark DeSilli. This was first kind of brought up at the town management forum about the warrant article that's coming up with this. And I'm going to repeat what I said there, and I'm going to just be a little more negative. I live with my father, 93 years old, both not working, fixed income. We don't have anybody in the school. We can't benefit from anything of this. Who's going to pay for the feasibility? That's one question. I also brought up, and I'm going to say as a challenge, to have a census of all parents, all households that have school children from preschool up to the 11th grade, and have their incomes pay for this, because it's going to benefit them, not us, fixed income as senior citizens. 3, I've been with the schools 40 plus years before I left in 2009, and I did help out a little bit with the new high school. It sounded good at that time, but now, yes, it kind of had a couple of mishaps. The building itself, the athletic fields, and everything, we had 2 town meetings for it. And for the people that were not involved in that, have made this town grow in student enrollment because of the development in households. So as a person that has a father who has no way of doing anything about it and can't take anything from it, that's why I say make a census of all the school parents and all the organizations you have, the PTA, the AEFs, and all those communities you have there. Have them bring it up, have them help pay for it, and then after 2 years, see who stays and helps pay for it for the next expansion. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
So, brief response.
I can speak to the athletic fields. Can you go to the
Well,
microphone?
yeah, why
Can
don't
you
you go to the,
microphone?
yeah, go to the microphone, Jim.
Well, I wanted to get permission.
Oh, sure, okay.
Better to ask permission than. Okay. As a former planning board member who had the joy of going through that whole process, the site plan approval, I thought I could give you a little bit of history on why the athletic fields had to come later. And it really came down to that at the time of site plan review and the cost of it, those fields went out. It was a beautiful setup. It was a very fancy setup. And it was just felt at that time that was what was sacrificed. Okay, is that helpful to know,
Sure.
to have that history?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
I do support your feasibility.
So-
My kids are grown, but
Thank you.
town takes care of its own.
So let me just, to Mr. DeSoni's point, just answer a couple of questions, Mark, and I think they're valid, right? So I've certainly have had conversations with individuals who no longer have students in our schools and are on fixed incomes, and it's a challenge. But I also look at it as we live in a community, and the community supports everyone. So when I think of just looking at those parents that have kids in schools, I tend to step back and think, where were we 30 years ago with athletics, buses, and opportunities to participate in events at no cost? So we now have families spending thousands of dollars outside of the tax base, right, to participate in sports, musicals, ride the bus, et cetera. So there is an additional tax that we do charge those families for a public education, which I think is very unfair. But that being said, I also look at those taxpayers still also pay their tax, which helps run this facility and other services that aren't necessarily directly related to their kids yet. That's part of being in a community, to me, is you're paying for all of the services. And having really good quality schools, by the way, does help property values. That's pretty clear. I think we have a really good school system, and it's not just because I'm the superintendent, but I see how our kids perform when they leave, and I see many families coming in and saying why we're buying and living in Ashland. One, it's still affordable, and two, it's because of the schools. I think those are really important things to really think about. So how do we, skirt around the issue of it's really a community? I don't know. I can't answer that question. It's that's just I don't get a choice where my tax dollars go when the federal government takes it or the state government takes it either. So.
And do you have any 70-year-olds in your classes now?
Do I have any what?
70-year-olds in your classes now?
I'm gonna,
Do I have any 70-year-olds in class?
70.
Just-
1956 Mendez would be close to 70.
all right.
Yeah, it's 64 years old. Right now, it's 64. The Pitaway School was built in 1927, I think. So, I mean, we've got one even much greater, much older.
I'm just going to remind folks that need to move along. So, I'd like people to ask one question and then let's not get into a debate back and forth if we can. Chuck, did you have a question about the school?
I just wanted to say that I got a public school education. Somebody else paid for that. We ought to be paying for this.
All right, thank you. Nice quick statement. That's what I like. Okay. Any other questions for Jim? Do any of the board members want to say anything about this particular question? No? Okay. All right, thank you, Jim. Thanks, Jim.
It's easy for me, huh?
Yep. Get you home. All right, thank you.
Just like town meeting.
All right, thank you. I did want to, if you didn't pick up, there are handouts by the door, so please remind people as they come in. I saw you doing that, so that's very good. I also neglected to thank WACA for televising this, so thank you for doing that. Okay, so the next one is the so-called Valentine Estate, and Carl Hackinson's going to do the presentation on that one. While Carl's coming up here, in terms of...
Carl's not coming up.
Oh, okay, hold on. Okay, so just one thing. Following Carl's presentation, if you want to ask a question, I appreciate just line up at the microphone. That helps me know how many people want to ask questions in terms of time available, and also the folks watching. This is going to be taped and played, so they can't hear what you're saying if you're not at the microphone. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Carl.
Thank you, Rob. This has to do with 133 West Union Street, right across the street here. There are a lot of moving parts here, and I'll try to do my best to explain it concisely and thoroughly. But in response to a lot of comments through a town survey and other meetings and gatherings over the years, something that has kept coming up over and over again is concern of the citizens for the congestion in town and for the fact that Ashland perhaps developed too quickly without a plan on how to have services in place to serve that growth, et cetera. One of the pieces of property that's been in play for a number of years now is the Valentine property, which I think that most of you may be familiar with, but it's the farmhouse and barn across the street here. There are about 8 acres there with that piece of property. What made this a difficult negotiation was the fact that it was fully permitted, and it was fully permitted. The application was for 132 units. The house was going to remain as part of the development, and the barn was going to be removed. So the board discussed the possibility of negotiating with the developer last summer. We weren't sure whether the developer would even engage with us in a discussion about this, but we were all in agreement that we should at least see what our options were there. So last summer, Michael and I approached the Capital Group, and they were willing to sit down with us. We talked about the possibility of buying the property from them, and these negotiations went on for some time. What complicated things was they have their original investment in the property, but they also have 5 or 6 years of legal costs, of engineering costs, permitting costs, and other what are referred to as soft costs that they have endured, that they were looking to recoup. They also have an expectation of profit. And if you know anything about development, that's based on the number of units. There's a certain formula that they use that they have an expectation of X amount of dollars per unit. In this particular situation, the developer also had a purchase and sale agreement with another company to hold the development after it was finished. And they also had an expectation of profit. So during those discussions, with all of that taken into account, they gave us a number that they were looking for, and it wasn't a number that we thought that was feasible for the town to absorb. So these negotiations went back and forth over the course of several months, and finally we came to an agreement of $3.5 million. We had the property appraised as a permitted development, and the appraisal came in at $4 million. So I will say that our negotiation brought the price down about 50% from where it started. So it certainly didn't start at $3.5 million. After we were finished with that, we were concerned about the property behind it, because the property behind it is 16 acres. And we were concerned that if we were to bring this forward to the people of Ashland for a vote, and then the people that owned the property on 11 Franklin Road, which is 16 acres and very developable, were to sell their property for a 40B. And a 40B, as most of you know, is an apartment, is a complex that allows the developer to circumvent most or pretty much all local zoning. And so you really lose control over the development of that. But we were concerned about that, and so we approached the landowners at 11 Franklin Road and said, if we're willing to bring this to the people to vote on, we need some reassurance that a development twice this size that's permitted is not going to show up on the piece of property behind it. And so through a negotiation, we negotiated a restriction on their property. Their property, if it were divided into house lots, could accommodate 22 single-family houses. They agreed to a restriction on their property that would restrict that to 8 houses. That doesn't mean that 8 houses are going to be on that property. What that means is there's an agreement in place that's not based on local zoning, that if that property is ever sold to a developer in the future, it's subject to that agreement. And so they can't do a 40B there if this is in place. So we were able to protect those 16 acres as well. We found out after the agreement that there was another 5 acres that someone was willing to add to that, but that's not part of what we're talking about here. So then it became, how do we pay for this? And what we were going to use the property for. So I think that what we came up with as a board was to ask for $700,000 of community preservation funds out of the historical bucket and out of the general bucket, and for $2.8 million in a debt exclusion. And because we were paying with partly with CPA money, that mandates that there be restrictions on our property, and that was the reassurance that the property owners at 11 Franklin Road had, that we weren't going to buy the property and build something there more than what is already there. And so when we crunched the numbers of what the ballot question is for to approve the debt exclusion. At town meeting, there will be 4 questions with regard to this issue. 1, to purchase the property. 1, to approve the deed restriction. 1, to approve the CPA request. And 1, to approve another CPA request to work on the facade of the barn and the house, and to make it secure while we decide what to do going forward. So what this comes down to from the taxpayer's perspective is we are protecting the house, we are protecting the property, we are protecting the 16 acres behind the property. We are providing an opportunity for numerous uses of the property, and that includes a community farm, a community entertainment center, administrative offices, a dog park. Myriad of things have been brought forward. That will be the town's choice. It won't be the Board of Selectmen's choice, but we have to secure the buildings and the land first. So the $2.8 million, actually the $2.8 million comes down to about $33 a year per household. Now, the other side of that is we now have a fiscal impact tool that we got in our negotiation with the Rail Transit District development. And that allows us to take all of the variables of development, put it into a formula, and determine whether the development is a net gain for the town fiscally or a net loss for the town fiscally. When we put this particular development that is already permitted into that formula, it was a net gain for the town until we put in the education component. And then it became a net loss for the town of $280,000 a year. And so in reality, it'll cost us more to not buy the property in services that will be needed to support a development over there. If you draw that out over 20 years, the 3.5 over 20 years doesn't change. But if you don't buy the property and you multiply the $280,000 in services over 20 years, it's $5.6 million. So we are buying the house, we're buying the opportunity to use the house as a community, we are protecting the land around the property, we're protecting the property on 11 Franklin Road behind. And we are also voting for not just what we want there, but what maybe we do not want there. And again, that goes to what people have had as concerns with regard to the impact of such a development. And keep in mind that that's just the development on the Valentine property. Development of 11 Franklin Road could be 3 times that size. And so those impacts will impact the infrastructure, our schools, and all of the services that flow through the town. And that's not even to speak to the quality of life issues in Ashland. It's already, most of you already realize how difficult it is to get around here at certain times of the day. A development of that size will certainly have a significant impact on the town. So we are asking, we are giving the town the opportunity to weigh in on whether they want to pay for the town that they ask for. This was a long negotiation. It was a lot of work. I have to say that when we started out, I didn't think that we would be able to bring this to the table. We were. And it's a one-time opportunity for the town, because if one of these articles fail, they all fail. They're all dependent on each other. And so if it does fail, Ashland won't have a second bite at the apple, because the developer has parallel plans here. He's agreed to let us take this to town meeting, but he's also going forward with his project if this does fail at town meeting.
Anything else?
Are there any questions for us?
Yeah,
Do you want to read
I'm
the
just
ballot?
going to ask people to line up here if they want to. Go ahead. You want me to read the ballot? Sure. I'll just read the text of the ballot for folks on watching us. West Union Valentine property ballot question: shall the town of Ashland be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2 1/2, so-called, the amounts required to pay for all bonds issued in order to pay the cost of the acquisition of the property known and numbered as 125 through 133 West Union Street, Ashland, Mass., including the land shown on Parcel A, Lot 1, 2, and 3, on the plan entitled Plan of Land, Ashland, Mass., as revised, et cetera, and page 18, including 7.67 acres plus or minus, and again, it's a yes or no question for the ballot, and a similar question at town meeting, of course. Does any of the board members want to make any comments on this? The only thing I'll add to what Carl said is that this is one of the reasons, I'm on the board of Selectmen to take this kind of proactive stance when we see something happening, to take action, at least offer the residents of town the opportunity to do something about it. So I wanted to thank Carl and the other board members for moving ahead on this. So thank you. Go ahead.
I have a couple questions on one. I think you said there'll be restrictions on the property, and I'd just like a little more information, like if we're talking about, I know it's open possibilities, so say a farm comes in and they need some other little barns for different animals, right? Or, I mean, that's just one that comes to mind, but, and then another thing is that we said that there would be the town, meaning the townspeople would have a choice on the options that would go there, and I mean, I know these aren't specific to the ballot, but they are background to decide about voting. What would the process be for the townspeople to have input on the potential future options?
Well, I can take the first one first. The money, if I have this correct, was $100,000 from the historical bucket, from the open space bucket. Okay. Okay, and 600 from undesignated. So what that means when we have use of CPA money, depending on what bucket it comes from, it needs certain restrictions. It's going to be a parkland restriction, which is pretty liberal as far as much more liberal than a conservation restriction, for instance, of what could go there. So what those agreements usually say, Kate, as long as they're approved by the state once they're in place, is what both sides agree can go there. So it's not etched in stone. It's usually constructed to address whatever property you're talking about. So if we're talking about a farm and you're asking, can you build other structures there to accommodate, I'm confident that that would be built into the agreement.
I think we had some anyone, Yolanda, did you want to say anything about, we had various discussions about the possibilities of this parcel dependent on the financing. And so it's actually quite exciting about the kinds of things that we could potentially put there. So I don't know if folks had other.
I'll take the second. So I think, as a board, we've decided, we've sort of said, okay, we're not going to have real in-depth discussions about this property until we've gotten past the votes. And then after that, we'll put a plan together, but it will include public forums. We'll ask people, we'll present some ideas. We'll ask the public to present ideas. And then it'll be a consensus onto what we think is going to be the best use of this property. As has been said, some of the discussion is, could we use the building as administrative offices? Some of our departments are getting bigger, and we could possibly use that space. There's been discussion of, turning it into some kind of art center, turning the barn into a place that could be rented. So there's all kinds of possibilities, and because the $600,000 is coming from the unrestricted funds, that gives us a little bit more opportunity to do different things than if it had come from open space or recreation. And historic, we want to maintain the house and the barn because they are historic, and that's one of the reasons driving the idea of purchasing this property.
So just one follow-up in that, will the people actually get to vote? And the only reason I'm saying is that we sometimes see the Board of Selectmen aren't necessarily in sync with the townspeople. And so if it's coming back, we get input, but the Board of Selectmen's the final vote, I do have some concerns about that.
At some point, someone has to be the final vote, and I would say that, we'll take the input from the public. We haven't finalized the full process because we don't have the property yet, and it's one of those things where certainly if you have input as to how you want the process to go, we'll listen to that, but we haven't said this is exactly how we're going to decide how to get there until we have the property. Once we have the property, we can define that. We'll probably have a discussion at one of our meetings as to how we're going to do the process, and we'll look for input then.
And I think, it's a good question. We have not, we have come into acquisition of other properties as well. And so I think we probably do need to spend some time thinking about the stewardship phase. And we've done some, Carl and the stewardship committee have done some great work around Warren Woods. So, but it is a good question, and we'll have to spend some time on that process. Thank you.
Kate, before you sit down, I just want to clarify a couple of things. Keep in mind, it's a pretty substantial property, both the structures and the land. So it doesn't have to be just one use. It can be multiple uses. And that was the first thing. And the second thing, when we were talking about restrictions, and I mentioned historical, in the warrant articles, and at least right now, there are 4 warrant articles for this. It's the debt exclusion that also has to pass the ballot, which is what this question is for. So the $700,000 for the purchase is taken from open space and the general account. The $100,000 for the renovation of the buildings is coming from historical, and so that will require a historical restriction on both the house and the barn. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Kate.
Did that clarify things?
Yep.
Mark?
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I'm getting my things here from the newspaper article I saw this morning that you put in, Carl. And this it's little tidbits. It says the feasibility, $33 per cost per household. It's little, but it's still taking out pockets of Social Security, fixed incomers, and people like me and my dad. And what's the municipal uses?
Well, let me speak to the first issue first. I would just reiterate what everyone else has said about community. I have no children, and I pay substantial taxes. Most of it goes to the school system. I don't have anybody in the school system. I don't have a problem with that. That's part of being in a community, and as the superintendent said, having a good school system is part of having a healthy community. So I think that when you bring up that number, you also have to consider what the impact, and I mentioned this earlier, of not purchasing the property is, because if we don't purchase the property, then we have to supply the services that are going to be required for a development of that size. So it's not like you're either keeping the money in your pocket or you're spending it. You're spending it this way or you're spending it this way. And we're giving the people of Ashland a chance to make that choice. And so the municipal uses are what we just discussed, that they will be town uses. We have to secure the property before we finalize that. We've had a lot of input, a lot of good ideas. I don't think there's anyone, particularly on the Board of Selectmen, that has an agenda as far as the use of the property. What our agenda is to give the opportunity to the people of Ashland to save the property and then subsequently decide how it would be used. And the caveat there is that it must be used and that it must be used for something. And that's what I've said to Michael. The only thing I'm opposed to is buying it and letting it sit there. So we will use it for something.
And for the developer and profit, in the, 40 Bs is his profit?
Could you say that again?
The profit for the company developer who's going to build there. What he mentioned statements of profits.
There are expectations of profits, and they're based on the number of units in the development.
And whose expectations?
Well, they're kind of norms in the developmental community. I went to an independent person that's doing another development in town, and I couldn't speak in specifics because we were still in executive session, but I did say, we're looking at buying a permitted project. He said, how many units? I told him. He said, how many acres? I told him. And he gave me a price, totally independent, and it was right on the money of what the price was that we were negotiating.
Okay, and diversifications. What are those other than office, and what should be there? What's the diversity about the property?
The diversification, I think it was a diversity of uses.
Yes.
And that's just that there can be many different uses. We could have municipal offices there, potentially. We could have municipal offices there. We could have community gardens there. We could have a town farm there. We could have a cultural center there. All of those things are different. All of those things are possibilities. And all of them could happen simultaneously if this were planned correctly, but we don't know that yet.
And
Mark, can we
I'm not done
just
yet.
wrap? I know, but we got
This
to let
be
other
last
people
one.
talk too.
Last one.
Okay,
Last
thank
one.
you.
What's it zoned under?
I'm sorry?
What is that property zoned under?
Well, I think it's residential A, but keep in mind, because you mentioned 40B, this is a 40B project that's permitted, so it really doesn't make any difference what it's zoned at, because local zoning is thrown out in a 40B project.
And once it's built up and all set to go, is there free housing for me?
No.
No housing. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to limit people to one question, maybe a short follow-up, assuming we can keep things moving along here. Mark left the room, but it was really targeted him, so. All right, Sarah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I might just sit down to do this. I was 12 hours on a plane yesterday. I think once again we have the problem, the bigger picture of Route 135 in the whole tax base. We need more non-residential tax base. We need more commercial. We need more everything we can get. Route 135 is being impacted not just because of the stuff that's happening in Ashland, because of the stuff that's happening in Hopkinton. And so it's likely that over time, 135 is going to want to become a commercial street, and we have done nothing for zoning or thinking about that. But you take that property off the rolls forever, when it could be some significant piece of commercial development, I think that's a problem. I think we're ignoring the whole issue of affordable housing because we're so afraid of the school issue. And yet it's a big problem in this state. It's a problem in this town. I'm being pushed out because of the increasing taxes, because we've become a residential tax base. We're a bedroom community. We become a residential tax base. Every time we do something, it's sent to us because we're not looking at the overall picture that we need to be moving toward more balance between residential and non-residential tax base. So I'm not sure that taking this off the road, going after this versus letting it happen as affordable housing, or once you start using the CPA money, you are absolutely limited. You will not be able to put like a commercial
Thank you, sir. I think
development
we
toward
get
the front.
gist of that. Does someone want to
Okay,
respond
I
to
will
that
comment
the
on that.
committee?
Our choices are not whether we want commercial development there or residential. Our choices are, do we want 132 units there, or do we want something that the town has a say over what goes in there? So I don't disagree with the fact that the town is heavily residential and less commercial, but that isn't one of our choices here.
All right, thank you. Paul?
It's unfortunate that Mark left. I was going to echo some of the community things and some of the things that might resonate with him as to why both of the projects are meaningful to everyone. So if this were to go ahead and be developed, as you stated before, it's going to be, it's certainly going to be a net deficit on our tax base. And so what does that mean for people like here at the senior center and things like that? It doesn't mean your taxes go up, but it might mean that we can no longer level service the services in the town because that has to come from somewhere. Or we cannot do the things we want to do here at the community center, the senior center, or other places in town. So that net deficit impacts everyone. Just as the school buildings and things like that, those are we have to consider those are infrastructure just like our roads. There are our primary meeting places. Our town meeting takes place at the high school. The winter and spring markets take place at the middle school. It's all interconnected. There's nothing that it just impacts one member of the community or one demographic of the community. So both these projects impact everyone. And I totally understand Mark's concern of, hey, I can't afford what I'm doing already, but you might end up paying the same amount you're paying now and getting less should we start having projects that are net deficits to the tax base.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
To your point, Paul, if someone mentioned Legacy Farms a minute ago, I would suggest if you want to see the impact of those large developments on your town, get behind a bus that stops at Legacy Farms, or get behind a bus that stops at the Chestnut Street Apartments. I stopped there the other day, and 25 kids crossed the street to get onto the bus in that one place, that one bus. So these developments have huge impacts on the community in other ways than just the schools, but certainly on the schools.
Thank you, Carl. I just want, some of the concerns about, I just want to say that, well, I'll speak for myself, but I think it's a sentiment shared by the board. We look very closely at development potential in town, and that's one of our initiatives, commercial development. We are targeting certain areas. This area is not targeted for commercial development. We don't think it's a good site. So we do share your concerns, but that's why we're targeting certain areas. We're looking at downtown, 126, Pleasant Street, but not this area. So I just wanted to say we're well aware of those kind of issues, and this is, I think at least my take on this. I can't speak for everybody, but we are putting this forward. Any other questions, comments on this ballot question? Okay, anybody else want to say anything about it? No, we're all good? All right, so that brings us, so this is good, we're moving right along. That brings us to the third one, and I will read it first. This is the, did everyone here, by the way, knows there's handouts by the door and got them if you need them? Okay, so this is question 3. I'll just read, I'll read the first paragraph, which I think pretty much states it. This is the marijuana ban ballot question. Shall the town of Ashland adopt the following amendment to the general bylaw, which would prohibit all types of recreational marijuana establishments as defined in General Law 94G, including marijuana cultivator, marijuana testing facility, marijuana product manufacturer, marijuana retailer, or any other type of licensed marijuana-related business in the town of Ashland the text of which and a summary of which appears below. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it does specifically accept this measure. It would not prohibit medical marijuana establishments. So, and this is a yes or no. Basically, it's a yes or no. People call it opt-out or ban. You'll see the word ban. So a yes vote would ban adult recreational use marijuana, basically, to kind of simplify it, but would allow medical dispensaries in town. This is not related to the medical dispensaries. So that's the basic question, which will be at town meeting and on the ballot. I do want to take a moment to talk about a little bit about the background of why the board about, I don't know, 10 months, a year ago, the moratorium was put in place to give us time to deal with marijuana establishments. And the board felt this was an important measure to use our option under state law to give the voters of town a voice in this and basically give people the choice to opt out of recreational adult use marijuana retail operations. That's basically what this is about. And as I think most people are aware, this has to pass both at town meeting and at the ballot on May 15th. And so that's really the basic question. Any of my fellow board members want to talk about this a little bit?
Well, I don't want to talk about the ballot question necessarily, but I do want to point out there's a handout here with a flow chart that is specific, says specific Article 15 or 16, Question 3, recreational marijuana prohibition. This actually applies to all of the ballot questions and the warrant articles in the relationship between town meeting and the ballot box. So if the feasibility study, as an example, passes one place, fails at another, it fails. So it's no different with the Valentine estate as with the marijuana question as well.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Anybody else want to say anything about the background to this or issues or? Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. I see no one at the microphone, so a little surprising. Any questions, statements? Well, if people, we have some time, I will allow people to make short and to the point statements if they wish.
Again, a point of information, my understanding is that this wording, the wording was changed to remove the references to town property, correct? Because that's covered in another statute. Point of information.
I believe that's true, right?
Is that
Mike?
true?
Why don't you repeat the question, Gina?
Stand on my tippy toes, or I don't want to break the mic. Here we go. My understanding from the read of the original warrant article is that the wording has changed because you have excised the portion about possession on town grounds.
That's correct.
Because that's covered elsewhere, correct? Okay, that's just a point of information. Thank you.
I believe that's true. I mean, this is a very simple, straightforward vote now.
I happen to think that if you brought it onto town property, you should, have your judgment.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
So I've heard two big issues discussed tonight and a lot of people concerned about their taxes being raised and the lack of commercial industrial development space in town. And I look at this in a different way, which is that we have an opportunity here because we don't have very much commercial industrial viable space, and that we could actually get some increased tax revenue similar to what we're getting right now with the restaurants, even though it hasn't been tried really in Massachusetts because they're just rolling the program out now. And we could actually have this program. We have an excellent police department. We have excellent programs in our schools to protect children, to help them make good decisions, things like that. And at a certain point, it's just like every other bad substance out there, tobacco, alcohol, the latest opioid epidemic. At a certain point, people make bad decisions. And we can't, as a town, in some respects, expect that everybody in town is going to make good decisions. But I think that there's enough safeguards in place through the state, and we can additionally ask for local safeguards, and we might actually be one of the few communities to opt in, and we would have the boon of tax money that we so desperately need to do the things we really want to do in this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anybody else? And one thing I would ask the people, keep their statements, say, under 4 minutes or so, and make one statement or question, and let other people speak before they come up again, or try to come up again. Go ahead, Paul.
So I just wanted to let everyone know that the school committee did discuss this at our meeting last night, and I want to read to you the stance that the school committee came to on this particular question. It says the school committee has concerns regarding having recreational marijuana establishments in the town of Ashland and possible ramifications to our student body. We encourage our town leadership to explore all legal avenues to mitigate concerns and risks to our students. So just wanted to let.
All right, thank you, Paul. Anyone else? How many, are there other people who intend to speak or ask questions on this one? Just show of hands, okay. You don't necessarily have to line up, but I just want to get an idea how much. Okay, go ahead, Amy.
Hi, Amy Turncliffe. I just wanted to speak to the revenue piece, and I, as a public health advocate, I've dug into the costs, and I think the substances that were just referenced, alcohol, tobacco, and opioids, are costing the United States citizens a lot of money. So it doesn't come with expenses and increased public health and safety costs on the back end. Now, here in Massachusetts, it's brand new, so we don't have examples of how much those costs would be here. But there have been cost analyses for other states that have showed that the back end costs are more than the revenue that you take in. Something to consider.
Thank you, Amy. Yes. Go ahead. Paula, why don't you go? I think you've been waiting there for a while, so.
Hi, everybody. It's no secret where I stand on this issue. It's also none of my business what a person does with their life. It's legal. I just want to point out that CVS willingly took a $2 billion hit to their bottom line by removing tobacco products from every single store. The American Lung Association is opposed to medicinal marijuana and smoking marijuana because it's harmful to the lungs. Just want to say that. Again, it's none of my business, but I think that it's interesting that the American Lung Association has taken a firm stance, and at what cost to our town and our kids are we doing this? That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just want to iterate that, the legalization of commercial use of marijuana is going to be statewide. It's going to be available. The question is whether or not Ashland gets to participate in it. So with concerns to the youth, those concerns are going to be valid whether or not Ashland participates and potentially gains the economic validity to it. And to speak to the woman who spoke about the potential cost deficit to the town in regards to that, there are options for the town to tax, both for costs that can be directly related to it and for other tax benefits that could offset that.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kirsten, for those of you who don't know me. I'm
Hi,
pretty new.
Kirsten.
I just want to touch base on people comparing it to tobacco, alcohol, opioids. There's no evidence that cannabis is in the same category. You're comparing apples and oranges, and you're right. There is terrifying things. There are terrifying things happening in all of our communities regarding substance abuse, and I fear that if we overlook the opportunity to establish this legal industry in our town, along with the potential revenue that comes with it, as well as the designated funds for mitigating any of the potential costs, which could include additional ways of educating our students. I fear that we're just sticking our heads in the sand, pretending that this doesn't exist. It's here, it's legal. Other communities are going to benefit from it, and I feel like Ashland is the type of community that's small enough we have great local government, community policing, public health. I think we can show people how to do this the right way. But again, the comparison to alcohol, opioids, tobacco disgusts me, because if people think that a plant is the same as those substances, then I really think you should do some research.
All right, thank you.
Could I comment on that?
Yes, you certainly can.
I don't want to turn this into a debate,
Sure, make a statement.
but, and I appreciate your opinion and I value it, but poppy seed is a plant, the poppy is a plant, and they make heroin out of it. So to compare plants, that's really not a good acronym to do. You may want to do some more research before you say that. Second thing is, there are several bills that are in legislation right now to deal with the ramifications of OUI marijuana. Being a cop for 32-plus years, I can tell you that that is the most difficult OUI for convictions. Okay? To get a conviction of OUI marijuana is very, very difficult. Okay? So the legislature, until such time the legislature, and these are just in first readings, and I have one of them here, but I won't get into it, but it has to do with nanograms of the amount of THC back levels that they're talking about. And they're not even sure if that's going to work. Scientifically, they don't know. So until such time that the state does their research and every other does their research, I think we'd be very careful and guarded optimism because of these tax dollars. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but we don't know how much money. There's a potential of millions of dollars. There's a potential. Will we see millions? I don't know, and I don't think any of you here can tell us there's going to be millions of dollars coming in, okay? So I just say, just a guarded invested interest. Just be careful of what you wish for, because it may not be what you want.
All right, thank you.
Can I just say one thing in response?
Well, short, something short.
Just something short as far as plants go. I hear you. Poppy seeds, tobacco, nicotine. But the cannabis plant, I don't think has been documented as killing people the same way those plants have.
Okay, thank you. I just want to note, so if people, I'm trying to draw a line between getting information out and people saying their piece without getting into a full-fledged debate here. So if you could just keep your comments short, and if you've been up once or twice, maybe don't come back again, but let other people speak. Okay, go ahead, sir.
I just want to point out to the gentleman's position that the Board of Selectmen put up on the website with regards to this issue some documentation from some federal agency, SHAMEA, whatever it was, and it pointed out.
Can I just hold on? Does anyone know what he's referring to? I don't think we put any information out.
I apologize for
All
not
right,
bringing
so-
it with me
False information.
at a later point. I hope I can point you to it. But it was a document that pointed out the potential hazards towards children and people under the age of 28. And it listed the potential hazards of opioids, it listed the potential hazards of alcohol, it listed the potential hazards of tobacco, and it listed the potential hazards of marijuana. And in each of those categories, marijuana was by far the least hazardous. The documentation I got from a website associated with this question and the Board of Selectmen documentation, there were applications for day-long alcohol permits and so forth and so on, supports that there's a lot of fear and potentially hysteria that may not be warranted, and as the young lady stated before, the amount of research is minimal at this point. And if we could just try not to operate out of a point of fear and try to operate out of a point of knowledge, I think we would all benefit from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Yes.
I stopped smoking grass 45 years ago because it made me paranoid, okay? So I'm not a big fan of this. But the discussion talks as though, we're talking about allowing marijuana in town. The people are smoking grass now. Before it was legal, and they will be whatever the law is. I'm not saying that this won't increase it, but we shouldn't talk as though this is, you know, there wasn't any before and there will be after this. It's not that clean.
Thank you.
I
Yes,
just
Suzanne.
really want to let people know that they can come to the committee site. I mean, opposition has their playground for information as well. I just think in terms of financial gain, we kind of outline exactly what a host agreement is, what the financial gain could be to the town. Having worked in 3 different dispensaries, I can tell you it is substantial. I am not allowed by confidentiality agreements to share particular information, but just on the medical alone, it is substantial. I also think the word prohibition is really scary in 2018. It's selective prohibition, in my opinion, when we can let a beer garden go on with face painting and nobody is in an uproar, no one's upset. It just seems very unfair to those of us who can't decompress with a glass of wine because it doesn't agree with us, that we can't have the same for us that works for us. And it's really, it comes down to freedom for me and fairness. And I think if people got educated, they would really come to understand the regulations take care of so many concerns that are already there. And we are going to lose out. And I know we're speaking about recreational and that medical is allowed. Medical is allowed because it's now the law. However, to get it in a town, there are other things that are going to be factored in, and it doesn't make sense for a business owner to come in with an automatic restriction on the business, because right now, as it stands, only medical dispensaries today are getting exception to be able to sell recreational. So they are becoming one and the same, even though we're talking about them as 2 separate entities. So I just feel like it is an advantage to Ashland. We could get in front of this. There is a substantial amount of money being laid out and being guaranteed and being talked about with you guys. And I think it's a shame if we don't. I know that Shrewsbury just passed. I know several towns are going forward and trying to make this thing move. It is a matter of when, really not if at this point. It's going to happen. I think we do have, I mean, the places I've worked, we have incredible relationships with the police department, fire department, and all of that. So I just want everybody to keep an open mind.
All right, thank you. Suzanne, you didn't mention the name of your coalition. I don't know if you wanted to.
Oh, ACE, Ashland Cannabis Education Committee.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Sure, hold on a second.
Okay.
Go ahead,
So
Steve.
I just want to be clear, the gentleman that spoke a little earlier, you mentioned a posting on the Ashland, it appeared as if you found something on the Town of Ashland website, and I don't believe it's anything that we've posted. So I'm wondering if it might be something on the Cannabis Education Committee, just to get some, some clarity there, because it's not something that we would post or would have posted.
I don't think we would have posted anything that was information against us, so I don't think it's on ours. Suzanne? You think anything? No, I
Go
don't
ahead,
think
Gina.
so.
So-
Hi, I wanted to give you some facts as far as I understand them. If I misstate them, I'm happy to stand corrected. My understanding of the revenue to the town, 3% on gross sales of medical, 3% on gross sales of adult use recreational, with the option for the town to get another 3% in a local sales tax. Now, I could run numbers for you. Believe it or not, I used to be an accountant, and I could run this in my head. I'll save that for another time. But I wanted you to have a little bit better idea of what we have at stake. Towns like Newton and Brookline, they have dispensaries, and I believe that they will go ahead with they're going ahead with the retail recreational establishments. I spent the afternoon talking to the son of a client of mine who lives in Newton. He's in the 9th grade at Newton North High School. And I asked him, what's easier to get, weed or alcohol? And he laughed at me, and he said, alcohol. And I said, why? And he said, well, everybody's parents have it, and nobody locks it up unless their kid, gets a problem. Then they lock it up. I'm not telling you this to make it up. I care about your kids. I raised 2 children in this town, and I was the parent who the kids of the not my kid and that went to a party that that the parents didn't know about, and they'd end up on my living room floor sleeping it off. I'd call their parents because I wouldn't let them drive. So that's my feeling on it. And to address the smoking issue, I do not smoke cigarettes. I rarely, if ever, drink. I have been a cannabis user for close to 50 years. I am 64 years old. I take 2 medications for an imbalance problem. Other than that, it's cannabis. My lungs get x-rayed every 5 years. I am in perfect health. Maybe I ought to be studied.
Thank you. Go ahead. Sarah.
I'll be the one person who says, I don't particularly have an opinion. I mean, I was in school in the 60s, and everyone used it. People still do. This weekend, it was the older people who were saying marijuana salve because they were using it medically. But I do think there's an issue because the federally it's still illegal. So if we're being paid taxes, it's going to be a cash business. You're going to have to sort of revamp to receiving large amounts of cash or figuring out how to account for it. And are we going to end up being sort of a money laundering? I don't know. I mean, but I'm thinking if the feds decided to move in Massachusetts on the marijuana, it could come back with the town how we control the money. I don't even know. I'm just throwing that out there because I thought, yeah, and we're not that popular with Trump. They might decide to make a thing of us. But it is going to be a change when you have the assessor just receiving tens of thousands of dollars.
Rob,
So
can I respond to that?
Certainly.
you can deal with that?
There is now
Good
a
one.
bank in Massachusetts that is just a bank in Massachusetts,
This
so it
can do
doesn't
it.
deal with the federal issues, and it can handle the cannabis money if necessary.
All right. Okay.
All right, thank you. If you want, thank you.
I don't know. I thought that was the big issue.
Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
So Paul Kendall again. So just 2 points clarification.
Excuse me, Suzanne just said that, would you say half of your transactions are through debit cards? Okay, so goes at a cash point. Go ahead, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
So 2 points clarification on the revenues. So the commonality between any type of marijuana establishment, whether it be recreational or medical, is the host agreement. That's the 3% of gross sales, but that then has to be publicly documented as and justified as costs incurred for the operation of that establishment. So it's not just money that you have to spend it in a way that's relative or somehow related to the operation of the business. It's only recreational that has the 3% of gross sales that is strictly a tax that can be used for any purpose. The other point is it's a little misleading to say that because the only current recreational or currently applied recreational dispensaries are also medical, and that's why they're merging. It's because the Cannabis Control Commission hasn't allowed for an application of a non-priority establishment yet. That won't happen until June 1st. So the only establishments that could have applied at this point are the currently operating medical dispensaries. So it's a little misleading to say they're the one and the same because of that reason. We couldn't actually even, they couldn't even apply right now if you weren't already an operating medical dispensary. So.
All right, thanks, Paul. Paula, is there anybody else who wants to speak on this matter? I'm just trying to, okay. Anybody, okay, go ahead, Paula.
I'll be
Oh, no,
brief.
that's all right.
I just want to clarify that I don't speak on fuzzy platitudes. What I said came from the American Lung Association, and the statistics are there. But specifically, as the chair of the Pond Street Project, a marijuana shop is not an economic development strategy. We have had a team of people working on this corridor for years. We've spent untold money for years. And I personally, I'm not speaking as chair, but I personally, as a resident and a taxpayer, would like to see a more cohesive economic development plan, like land assemblages, where the value goes up and where we can have strategic development instead of going right for the money, because a marijuana dispensary is not an economic development strategy for our town. We have to look at this from the 30,000 mile view, right down to the macro. We're loaded with convenience stores, low-rent retail. We're loaded with coffee shops. We have no real significant high-end retail, and a marijuana dispensary, from an economic development perspective, and Sarah Hines, architect, as an urban planner, can speak to, and what the attraction factor is when you bring something like this into a town. Other retailers look, and there are other retailers that will stay clear away from our town. We have 126. There are specific retailers that will not take up tenancy on Route 126 because of some of the tenants that are there. I'm just asking to think about this. Let's think it through, because once a building is in, once a business is in, it stays. And the unforeseen consequences, we don't have any idea yet.
All right, thank you, Paula. Well, I think that wraps it up, unless I don't see anyone else. So, anyone else on the board that want to say anything? Yes, go ahead, Steve.
The only thing I'd like to say is, and it's related to all of the ballot questions, is really out to the folks that might be watching this. We don't have a lot of people in the room tonight, so people that are watching, the importance of getting out to vote. We can talk all night long. We can post all day and all night on Facebook. It means nothing unless we go out to town meeting and vote, unless we go to the ballot and vote. So all I can ask you to do is find the time, make the time, attend town meeting, make your voice count, go to the ballot box, make your voice count. Otherwise, other people are making decisions for you.
All right, thank you, Steve. All right, so I think that wraps it up. I want to thank you all for coming. I know these are complex matters, and I appreciate the viewpoints put forward in the civil manner in which it was done. So thank you very much.